The Beverly Hillbillies. The Noble Mission. The sun hung high over the sprawling estate as Jed Clampett watched his kin prepare for the day. It was a bright afternoon, filled with the kind of hope that only a family like the Clampetts could carry. Paul stood nearby, observing the curious activity in the kitchen cabinets. Elmer was there, or rather, Elmer the raccoon was scurrying around inside the dark corners of the wooden cupboards. To an outsider, it might have looked like chaos, but to Jed, it was just another day of natural cleaning. Elmer was a handy little critter, his raccoon fur acting as a magnet for the lint and dusty layers that settled in the house. Jed noted with a smile that the little animal seemed right proud to be happy and useful. He was, as Jed put it, a dandy little duster. Granny and Ellie Mae joined them, and Jed suggested they take their dusters outside to shake them out properly. There was work to be done upstairs as well, specifically with the dresser drawers and the closets. Amidst the flurry of activity, Jethro approached with a look of concern on his face. He reminded Uncle Jed that old Honest John had never returned to collect his $700,000. Jethro, always looking for an opportunity to expand his horizons, asked if he could have that vast sum as an advance against his allowance. Jed had to chuckle, pointing out that at 50 cents a week, it would take a considerably long time for the boy to pay back such a fortune. Jethro claimed he was young enough to wait, but Jed reminded him that Honest John needed that money for a much higher purpose, the fight against smog. The idea of fighting smog ignited a spark in Jethro. He declared his intention to throw his own brain into the battle against the hazy air. It was a dandy cause, everyone agreed. They had heard that the only way to whip the smog was through a combination of brains and money. Jed reckoned that with their resources, they already had a leg up on the situation. While Ellie Mae and Elmer headed upstairs to continue their chores, Granny reminded Jed of a phone call from Mr. Drysdale. The banker was understandably nervous about having $700,000 in cash sitting around a private residence. He had developed hives from the sheer worry of it and was on his way to pick up the money to return it to the safety of the bank vault. Jed, however, was a man of his word. He had promised that money to Honest John to help clean the air, and a promise was a promise. Jethro was equally committed, convinced that his own intellect would be the deciding factor in the conflict. When Granny questioned how he intended to fight smog, Jethro explained that since it required both brains and money, he would provide the brains while the money was already available. He felt a real brute of an idea sitting right between his sideburns. Granny was less than impressed, suggesting the only brute Jethro possessed was at the end of his own gutter, but Jed encouraged the boy. Even when Jethro admitted he did not quite understand what smog was, he remained confident. He had listened to the weather reports and knew that light eye irritation was expected, though he was not worried because he possessed dark eyes. Down at the bank, Mr. Drysdale was losing his patience. Ong pressured Miss Jane Hathaway to don a guard uniform and go to the Clampett estate to retrieve the money. He insisted she should not take no for an answer, even suggesting she use a disguise so Jed would not recognize her. Miss Jane was hesitant, especially when Mr. Drysdale handed her a gun and told her to fire a few shots over Jed's head to show she meant business. She flatly refused such a violent approach, calling the banker's plan a disgrace. Undeterred, Mr. Drysdale arrived at the mansion himself, accompanied by the disguised Miss Jane. He tried to paint her as a mad dog killer to intimidate Jed, but the ruse failed immediately. Miss Jane removed her disguise, and Jed simply thought it was some kind of practical joke that he did not quite appreciate. The tension rose as Mr. Drysdale demanded the money. Jethro was literally sitting on the sack of cash, refusing to move until he solved the smog problem. He told the banker he would not eat until he figured out a way to whip the pollution. Mr. Drysdale suggested he go get a stick and hit the smog, but Jethro ignored the sarcasm. Miss Jane, ever the voice of reason, tried to explain that the finest minds in the country were working on the issue. Jethro took this as a challenge, deciding right then and there that he would invent a replacement for the internal combustion engine. He asked for clarification on what such an engine was, and upon learning it powered automobiles, he set his sights on creating a steam or electric car. The argument over the money continued. Mr. Drysdale claimed the money belonged in his vault for safety, while Jed insisted it stayed to fund the smog tunnel project. Jed explained the plan. They would drill a tunnel through the San Bernardino Mountains and use a giant fan to draw all the smog out of Los Angeles. Mr. Drysdale called the idea preposterous, but Jed and his family liked it. Miss Jane intervened, explaining that a problem of this magnitude had to be solved on a national level. She told Jed that only the President of the United States could coordinate the necessary brainpower and the billions of dollars required. $700,000 was just a drop in the bucket. This news changed everything for the Clampetts. Jed began to study the idea of giving his entire fortune to the president. Mr. Drysdale, fearing the loss of $95 million from his bank, became desperate. He even tried to fake a suicide note to guilt Jed into keeping the money in the bank, but Miss Jane refused to participate in the drama. Meanwhile, Jethro had been busy. He emerged with his truck, claiming he had converted it into a clean steam engine to solve the pollution problem. The family was nearly choked by the smoke it produced, leading them to retreat back inside. Jethro then decided that if the president was the only one who could handle the situation, he would drive his invention straight to Washington to deliver the brains and the money in one package. Jed pointed out that $95 million might be what the president needed. Granny was ready to pack, and Ellie Mae wanted to join the journey. Mr. Drysdale, realizing he was about to lose his biggest account, hired an impressionist named Rich Little to pretend to be the president on the telephone. The plan was to convince Jed to keep his money in the Commerce Bank of Beverly Hills. When the call came through, Jed was awestruck. He spoke to the voice he believed was the president, offering his fortune and promising to bring gifts like pickled pawpaws and a baby possum to the White House. The fake president insisted that Jed should leave the money in the bank where it would draw maximum interest under the care of the wise Mr. Drysdale. He told the family to stay put and wait for a man in a white coat to give them further instructions. The family was disappointed but obedient. Jethro realized he could not drive his electric car to Washington anyway because he could not find an extension cord 3,000 miles long. Back at the bank, Mr. Drysdale was relieved, though he had to pay the impressionist a hefty fee for his performance. However, a misunderstanding occurred when a milkman in a white coat arrived at the Clampett house. Jethro, having once trained as a double-knot spy, convinced himself the milkman was a secret government agent delivering a coded message. He told Jed that the president had changed his mind, and they were indeed needed in Washington. The excitement returned to the mansion. The family began packing their belongings, convinced they were on a mission of national importance. They boarded a plane, heading toward the capital, with their hearts full of generosity. On the flight, they shared their story with a fellow passenger, explaining how they were going to give $95 million to the president to save the world from smog. They spoke of their gifts and Jethro's inventions with such earnestness that the other passengers could only listen in wonder. As the plane soared high above the clouds, the Clampetts looked forward to their meeting with the leader of the country, ready to share their wealth and their simple, honest spirit with the world. It was a journey fueled by love, family, and the sincere desire to do some good, proving that even with millions in the bank, they were still the same humble folks from the hills.